All right. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to MEI's Defense Leadership Series. Today, in its 11th episode, and my guest today is Simone Ledeen. Hi, Simone.
Hi.
Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, who served in the Trump administration. My name is Bilal Saab. I'm a senior fellow and director of the Defense and Security Program at MEI. I'm also an adjunct assistant professor at Georgetown University and an associate with the Clayton-Dale Institute in The Hague. Let me say a couple of words about the Defense Leadership Series for those of you who have not heard of it before. And for those of you who do know it, my apologies for sounding like a broken record, but I have to do it. This is a platform to engage current and former officials from the United States and in the region, people who have responsibilities for defense and national security policy. We were thrilled, honored to inaugurate the series with a conversation on June 10th of last year. Man, time flies. With CENTCOM Commander Frank McKenzie. If you're interested in watching all the previous 10 episodes, they are all on our website and also on YouTube, neatly organized as part of a series. And the only reason why I know that is because I was just surfing YouTube a few moments ago and I saw that they were all neatly categorized. Simone very recently joined MEI as a non-resident senior fellow, and I am absolutely thrilled to have her on my team. She has already written a piece on U.S. policy towards Egypt, which I encourage you to read. And I believe it ran in the Hill, right, Simone?
Yes.
Yep. I think we have it on the website as well. Simone's bio is on our website, so I'll be brief. Prior to serving as DASD for the Middle East, she served in various capacities in the Pentagon, and she also did some advisory work in Baghdad as part of the Coalition Provisional Authority. Simone has also experience, which is very interesting, in finance, given her academic training. And right now, she is a consultant. She has an MBA from, I'm going to butcher that, Bocconi University. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's in Milan, and a BA from Brandeis University. Other than the good-looking people and the food, why Italy?
Well, actually, I lived in Italy for my first 4 years. My parents are American, but they met and married there. So we moved to the States when I was 4, and I always wanted to go back. So that's the short answer.
Okay. I've been to Milan a couple of times, and it actually very much reminds me of my homeland in Beirut. There's a lot of similarities between the two places, both good and bad.
I agree. I agree.
Um, okay, well, Simone, before we start, just sometimes I do this. Tell us something about you we don't know, or you would like people to know.
Uh, well, thanks for the intro and thanks for the bio. I guess one other thing I probably like to highlight is that I did serve in Afghanistan as well, two 1 year tours, one in 2005 and one in 2009 to 2010. Um, People who know me kind of know that, but I think in the context of what we're talking about today, although Afghanistan's not specifically in the Middle East, there's certainly a lot of crossover issues.
Okay, fair enough. It was part of my portfolio since I had to handle the entire AOR, but okay. All right, so we got a lot to discuss. We will also be receiving questions from the audience, so I'll make sure to monitor those. And with that, let's just start with, I guess, what's always topical, what's always challenging, which is the issue of Iran. This also happens to be urgent at the time. Um, we moved from maximum pressure campaign during the Trump administration to now possible prospective engagement, right? Back to talks on various issues. So first of all, as you were assuming your responsibilities as DASD ME, um, how much were you involved in that policy? So the Pentagon typically prepares military plans, right, to aid or bolster American diplomacy, right? But there
Yes.
was no diplomacy going on at the time. So what kind of role did you play in that conversation? If you don't mind describing that first.
Sure. So, as you noted, and especially in the Defense Department, we weren't really playing a role in terms of diplomacy. But just to take a step back, so I began my tenure as the DASI Middle East in April of last year.
Right.
And prior to that, I was working in Solik. So for those of you who don't know, that's the office that oversees special operations and low intensity conflict. And that's also the office where I began my government career back in 2004 when I returned from Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was sort of like a homecoming. So the office that I worked in specifically oversaw special operations and counterterrorism, which also included things like information operations, irregular warfare. And so in that regard, there was a lot of policy that was being developed at the time, including, that the National Defense Strategy has one annex only, which is the irregular warfare annex.
That's right. Yeah.
And so that was something that I had the opportunity to work on, which was hugely rewarding, and which I certainly did carry over into my new role as the DASD for Middle East. And so in that sense, we were charting new courses, even though it was the end of the Trump administration.
Right. Okay. Just tell us in your own words. We've read so much about it, so many opinions about it, polar opposites, right? Very briefly, in your own words, what was the administration trying to accomplish with the policy? What was the end result?
Well, the end result was what everyone was saying throughout, which was a new and better deal. That was the goal. Okay. That obviously wasn't the actual end result, but there was no secret hidden agenda there. And I think a lot of people who you could call Iran hawks wished that the goal were different. The goal was different, but it wasn't. And, President Trump was very open about the fact that he wanted to, what he said, end the endless wars. And so when there were policy formulations and really the military was going through its planning cycles, that was kind of top of mind. So they were focused on deterrence, sometimes below the level of armed conflict, but certainly below the level where there would be, large conventional hostilities. And there were obviously some notable incidents during that time, but there was no huge war, which everyone was pleased about.
Right. Do you think the policy received a fair evaluation?
No, I don't. I don't think the policy received a fair evaluation. I think there's been a lot of reflexive, because Trump was associated with it, it was bad. But I think right now we're looking at a situation where the new administration is potentially, looking to give away everything up front, everything that we fought so hard for, including a lot of the squeeze that we put on the Iranian economy, which resulted in a 25% reduction in their defense spending. I think that's a significant accomplishment. You can't really give everything away up front and expect to obtain a concession later. So I hope the early signs that we're seeing from the Biden administration are just that, and they'll reconsider the road they're heading down. But I also think there were other important things that we were doing to support the maximum pressure campaign. For example, our engagement in the region. If you don't involve the region's going to chart its own course. And we're definitely seeing that now. China and Russia are very happy to fill the void. It's tough to negotiate with a country that uses terrorism and blackmail to achieve its ends. I mean, how do you operate in that environment? I would find that extremely challenging.
So before we judge what the current administration is trying to do, what is just your own understanding of their approach? How different is it from what you guys were trying to accomplish? I mean, there's obviously the intent that we want to go back to the negotiating table. That's pretty much clear. Mm-hmm. But what about the approach itself? Do you feel like There's clarity about how we're going to go about it. Do you feel like there's going to be linkage between the nuclear issues and then the regional security issues, or those two issues are going to be separate?
That's a great question. Unfortunately,
And you may not know, but I'm just asking.
yeah, unfortunately, I'm not really privy to the new administration's plans with respect to speaking with Iran, or what their plans or policy is going to be. You know, I certainly think in the past we've handled those two issues separately. Um, and part of the reason for that, I think, is there are different coalitions involved when you're talking about the nuclear program, and you're talking about, you know, regional malign influence. Although they're certainly related, they're different, and they require different strategies and different approaches, in my
Right.
opinion.
So just to make sure I get this right, so you prefer that we have these two issues separate as we engage the Iranians. It's not
Uh,
all part of one conversation, right? Because there's different points of view today about how we're going to go about this, right? Do you think the regional security issues would overwhelm the nuclear conversation, which is exactly what the Obama administration's thinking was at the time?
Interesting.
What's your own sense there?
Uh, well, my own sense
Should
is
we talk missiles and proxies as we talk about enrichment issues, or completely separate?
um so I'll just be honest and say I haven't really thought about that in this I haven't thought about this in that way.
Okay.
So
Well, there's no.
it's hard for me to answer the question when we're engaged in when we were engaged in what I was working on, which was ways to effectively curtail certain things. There were many discussions that were overlapping.
Right.
So it's hard. I don't think you can really combine everything into one, but at the same time, um, do I think one deserves greater focus than the other? I mean, they're both extremely problematic and deleterious to the region,
Okay.
especially when you consider, you know, our long-term collective goal of a safe and prosperous Middle East. Both are equally damaging, and both equally should be addressed,
Okay. Okay.
perhaps in different ways, but not one more than the other, in my opinion.
As you recall, one of the I would believe mistakes, which this current administration admitted there was a mistake when we came up with the JCPOA, was not to involve our regional partners in the conversation. Not necessarily actually be at the same table, but just, broader consultations, right?
Yes.
How do you think today we can rectify that mistake and involve them? Just thinking out loud, practically speaking.
Well,
Do
I
you
think
just do more strategic dialogues, or just better consultation, broadly speaking?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the Obama administration, I mean, they actively, as you said, they did engage regional partners, and uh, that was a mistake. I think our partners have messaged recently, excuse me, that they want to be involved this time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if there are talks, if there are negotiations, if there ends up being a new deal, they should be part of the conversation. And that, you know, that's supporting our, you know, U.S. long-term strategic goals as well, because what would we want more than the region to be able to step up, regional partners, and take, you know, a lead in this that would allow us to free up some of our resources to
Right.
pivot where we need to pivot and focus on emerging challenges.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of goodness there, and they're, you know, they live there, so they have a very immediate motivation to be involved.
You're all right. They do live there. Um, Biden's recent strike against Iranian targets in Syria. I'm sure you tracked that incident,
Yes.
which was in response to attacks against our personnel in Iraq. Just what's your own view about that? Was that meaningful? Was it symbolic? Should we have gone about it differently? As in choose targets inside Iraq? What's your own view on this? And and is this sustainable, by the way? Just to add to that, it's one thing to have a rationale which is completely compelling as to why you don't want to strike in Iraq, whether it's the respect of Iraqi sovereignty, whether it's all the other issues that we care about in Iraq, which made us strike in Syria. But if you continue to see escalatory acts by the Iranians, whether it's in Iraq or elsewhere, do you continue to limit that option to Syria, or do you start thinking differently that maybe we need to do something also elsewhere? So what's your own view on that?
So I'm going to unpack that. I think those are a couple of questions in one.
Yep.
So with respect to specifically with respect to the strike in Syria, the statement was that this is meant to be defensive and deterrent. I mean, I have a pretty cynical view at this point, and I think it was very predictable, ultimately pretty meaningless, almost the equivalent of a photo op, I think, and really the bare minimum to be able to say that they did something. But when you compare that to what the Iranians did, a major missile attack against a U.S. base, which, thank God, no one was directly killed, although a contractor had a heart attack and died as a result. That is, I think that's not a sufficient response. And again, that was, in my view, the bare minimum to be able to say they did something, because otherwise it would have been problematic for them. More broadly, Bilal, you were asking about the, Iraq and militias. I mean, first of all, I want to be clear, a more accurate descriptor for these groups are Iran-backed militias. There is
yes
a ton of evidence that shows anyone awake and paying attention that these are Iran-backed militias, and frankly, calling them Shiite-backed militias can actually be offensive to other Shia who aren't part of the Iranian regime or supporting this. So I prefer to use the correct term, which is Iranian-backed militias. Anyway, this also gives Iran a pass for its activities, and I think that's a big mistake. Again, if you're trying to come into negotiations with Iran, we have to be honest about what they're doing. And this is, they've had this reign of terror in Iraq now for quite a while. One of the things I thought was interesting, and maybe you noted this too, there was this big, following the strike against the Hashid in Syria, there was this kind of big outcry, but it was in protest against, our Defense Department statement saying that the Iraqis provided intelligence supporting the strike. That was what really pissed them off, which I thought was that was very interesting and very notable. And I've been thinking about and wondering, was Secretary Austin intentionally messaging to the Iranians and to others that, Iran, you don't own Iraq, they still work with us, and we're still, very solid partners. I think time will tell, but I thought that was really interesting. And just to demonstrate, though, the power of these militias, the Hash al-Shabi, I mean, they have more than 100,000 personnel, and they've received, I want to say, over $2.5 billion from the Iraqi budget last year. While, look at the Kurds, look at the Peshmerga, who were instrumental in the fight against ISIS. They're left struggling. So there's certainly a huge amount of Iranian influence, Iranian malign influence. Is that something that we want to remain active in and engaged in, supporting the Iraqi government and the Iraqi army? Time will tell. I don't know what the new administration is planning to do. So it'll be interesting to see.
So if you believe that it was a slap on the wrist, what would have been a more preferable response? Recognizing that you do agree that we have interest in Iraq that we want to preserve, and that also we are sensitive about stability in the country. So how do you weigh those things? I mean, this is not an easy decision, right? You agree with that?
Certainly, and it's clear that, and this is a tightrope that any Iraq watchers are very well aware of.
I'm not asking you to give me operational plans and specific ideas about where to strike and what to do, but if you strongly believe that this was symbolic, then you certainly have some kind of an idea of what would have been more effective.
Sure, there plans for everything on the table, as you know.
Right.
But I think so. First is a decision to take strikes in Syria versus taking strikes inside of Iraq, and there are many reasons for that. And not all strikes taken inside of Syria would be a photo op and meaningless. By the way,
Sure.
there are other things that we could do.
Sure.
There are also going back to something I said earlier, and really, I spent many years working, as you noted, in the finance space, terrorism
Right.
finance, anti-money laundering. And one of the things that I learned doing that work was how loosely knit a lot of these organizations are. These are like trust-based networks.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that we can do to shake that trust among some of these people, some of these organizations. Those are also things that we could be doing that are not entirely visible and not part of kind of a conventional activity, but interesting nonetheless, and potentially long-term, fruitful. But I think the question that you're asking is more kind of near term, related to conventional response options. And yes, certainly if there's a red line for the Iraqis, if we cross it, we are in danger of not being welcome to stay there anymore. And that's a decision space for ultimately the commander in chief, obviously. But I think any response option in that region is taken with that possibility in mind.
So you got me curious. You just mentioned that there are some things that we could do to address the challenges posed by those militias, whether it's on the fundraising side of things or other activities that they do, and break that trust, you said. What are some of those things?
Well, I think there are a lot of really there are a lot of really interesting activities that are going on, and actually they're not any sort of government sponsored in all ways, but there are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
interesting activities that are going on among communities, in the public space,
Right.
that are highlighting corrupt activities. So you think
Yep.
your money is going, you want to contribute to the cause, or you want to contribute to this is kind of classically what we did in the CT space.
Yep.
Well, guess what? The money you thought you were sending to X person is actually, ending up as a private jet for him and
Right.
his family. Is that
Right.
what you intended? That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. So you're disrupting these trust-based networks and the trust that these people have with each other, which is really not that strong in a lot of cases. Some cases it is, but we could be doing more of that, I think.
Okay, fair enough. You wrote about Egypt, Simone, which was your first subject with us. So why don't we just talk about that a little bit? And let me ask you the absolutely impossible question here. Can we do both human rights and security in Egypt or in any other Arab country that we care about?
I think we have to. I think we
Okay.
have to.
Tell us what the gist of the piece is for those of us who, for those people who didn't actually read it.
So thanks for bringing this up. Thanks for asking this question. I think we have to, because we don't have a choice. This is sort of what I lay out in my article. So I talk a bit about the history of, like, how did we get to this situation that we're in with Egypt. President Biden last year said, no more business as usual for President al-Sisi. there have been a number of statements that have come out, and I also discussed the history of our challenges with our security assistance program with Egypt, stemming from the from the coup and subsequent challenges. Look, is it perfect? It's not perfect, and I talk about that as well. It's far from perfect. Um, but we have challenges also with many other countries. My point that I was trying to make in my article was really focused on the fact that we give up any leverage that we have if we shut the door on the relationship. And our relationship with Egypt is a deep and profound relationship that has um, it has endured for many decades, and we would just be ceding the relationship. We would no longer be their partner of choice. They've already stopped, or they've reduced dramatically the things that they're buying from us on the security assistance side. So we risk, we risk our position as Egypt's partner of choice in the long term. There are also regional issues that Egypt is deeply involved in, that we should be seeking to influence, and we maintain that influence by maintaining a relationship. And ultimately, if we end the relationship, we end the influence, and then Egypt will be forced to go to, Russia, China, other countries that don't have the best human rights record and really won't focus on it at all. So that's really the point that I was making, and I hadn't really seen that being discussed elsewhere. So,
But tell me, who's saying that we should be ending the relationship? I don't think that's the goal.
well, I hope that's the case. I hope that's the case. There's been a
You
lot
don't
of
think this administration is going to have rupture in relations with Cairo, do you?
I don't know. I don't know. All I can do is respond to the rhetoric that I've
We
been.
have bigger problems with the Saudis, but we are recalibrating relations there.
I would
It's
love to
not as
talk
bad
about.
with Egypt, I think.
I would love to talk about that too.
Well, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but hold on. So I've got Major General Abdurrauf Musa, who I'm guessing is from Egypt. He's asking you, how important is Egypt to the U.S. with this administration? So you've already started talking about that, but just a few more words.
With this administration, the Biden administration.
Yep.
Yeah, I am curious to know that as well. Again,
Maybe you guys should talk.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. All I can do is respond to the public statements that I've seen that caused me some concern and caused me to respond and write that article.
Fair enough. What's your opinion of the Khashoggi document? Should we have released something like that? Does that risk, showing what our methods are in intel gathering? Just generally speaking, what's your opinion? And then we'll get into the relationship with the Saudis. So let's just start with that as a sort of a newsy item.
Yeah, so I, not a huge fan of releasing that document.
You're not the only one, by the way. So a lot of intel people who've served for many, many years have had similar concerns.
Yeah, so I also was an intelligence officer. I worked at DIA and other places, and an analyst. And I also don't think that is the best intelligence analysis I've ever seen. And frankly, it didn't really say anything new that hasn't been written in many other places already. So if people were looking for some sort of evidence, or if the Biden administration was trying to provide evidence supporting its what is probably a change in policy, it didn't meet the mark, in my opinion. So I also think more broadly they're making a huge mistake, because it's in the U.S. best interest to have a solid strategic partnership with both Saudi Arabia and MBS. I mean, the same thing. I bet MBS is a key asset for us in promoting something that we care deeply about: normalization with Israel, checking Iranian power in the region. And that ultimately enables us to play a less active military role in the region, which everybody would like us to do. So yeah, I question the motives behind releasing it, other than we said we were going to, so we are, but not really. Or we're not actually going to say anything new, but we're going to make it seem like it's really explosive.
So
But
you're willing to disregard everything else he's done? You're saying that he's an asset, he's an ally. I mean, you are aware that there's a lot of things that he did that really were not in our interest.
yes, and Bilal, I think that there are many partners we can point to who fit that mold.
Fair enough.
But I think, I mean, we talked about Egypt. I mean, I have the same perspective. You can pick a partner, but I think it's better to have a relationship and try to influence through the relationship than just say, well, you're completely at odds with everything that we stand for, which they're not. If you look at the reforms, they're not, it's not 100% of what we want, but it's something. And so I think that we need to be more supportive.
You don't think you're a fan of recalibrating relations with the Saudis? So let's just be clear about what that means, as in you're turning away from MBS and sort of dealing with the head of state, who's King Salman, to send a message that, we're quite unhappy with the ways you've been governing over the past few years. So you're not a fan of that?
What is the strategic end state? Why are we doing this? What do we want that we don't have right now? That's my question. So I wouldn't focus so much on, am I a fan of saying this or saying that? I'm a fan of supporting what our stated desired strategic end state is. So what is that? What is the purpose of recalibrating this relationship right now? Is it to show Iran that we're no longer as closely linked to Saudi Arabia, and therefore reducing pressure on Iran, and will force Saudi and other Gulf countries to align more closely with them and take pressure off of Iran? Maybe that's the desired strategic end state at this point. I can't say, but my belief is that it's not just about releasing a document or making a statement or having a conversation. It's about our overarching policy goals, and are these steps along a broader path to achieve those policy goals?
Well, my opinion doesn't matter, but I'm telling you that the administration very clearly communicated that we're going to promote and respect human rights. So just because you're asking what is the strategic end goal, that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not we're going to achieve that is a separate matter, but at least that is the intent.
Look, let me be clear. I'm not saying that I don't support human rights. I absolutely support human rights. I just think that we have more influence over these partners and changing some of these behaviors that are counter to human rights and our core beliefs as Americans, by engaging with them, by maintaining relationships, maintaining the leverage that we have, walking away, or just publicly embarrassing them or attempting to. Does that further human rights ultimately?
Well, we're still talking to the king. I mean, I don't know how long that will last. He's an older man and he's ailing. So this policy has an expiration date, as I tell friends of mine when we talk about Saudi. So for now, it seems to be the preferred approach of the administration. But at some point, you're going to have to deal with him, and he's going to be king for a very, very long time. So, but enough about Saudi. But you can see how it's a challenge that's not unique to the Saudis, as you said yourself.
No.
You see it with every other partner of ours in the region, right? It's just a matter of intensity in varying degrees. Let's talk about something you care about a ton, and I know that you played an important role in that in the Pentagon. In an email that you fired to our team just recently, you were just saying how excited you were about the historic development of the Abraham Accords. So just tell us more. Why are you so excited about it beyond what the obvious that, it's always good for countries in the region to normalize with Israel and to uh, promote positive change in relations. So what else is there that is exciting that we may not be aware of, or you want people to know more about?
Well, I think it's completely. I think we are only now beginning to understand how it has and will completely change dynamics in the region. I think Israel had quiet relationships with all of these countries for many years, as you know, and others who have not yet normalized, but who I expect will normalize in the future. Um, but they weren't gaining any of the economic benefits. Neither side really was gaining. They were doing, intelligence sharing, things like that. But really coming out into the open and now having all of these very exciting to me economic agreements. They're partnering on, like, Israel, UAE are partnering on space, their water. I mean, they just signed this massive agreement. I think not only is that exciting, and I think some of the most exciting developments are happening at a person to person level. On online, it's been really exciting to see how many people are traveling. And actually, I was in the region in December and passed through the Dubai airport. And I mean, Hebrew was the predominant language that I heard in the Dubai
Was it?
airport. Yes, yes, which
Wow.
is something that I lived in Dubai for 2 years. I never could have imagined in my lifetime that I would witness that. So just on a kind of basic emotional level, it's
So
very
Emiratis speaking Hebrew.
not yet, not
Oh,
yet.
okay. I'm like, how did they learn the language so quickly? Okay.
But I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
They move
Yeah.
fast. Uh,
Okay.
but I also think it's changed in another important dynamic, which is um, the the very Washington idea that we can't make any progress in the Arab world without an Israel
Right.
Palestine agreement, and
Yeah.
that's clearly not the case anymore.
Yeah.
So, with the PA elections coming up in July, it'll be really interesting to see, you know, are are the Palestinians still happy, or I don't know if they are happy anymore with like Abbas leadership, but what are they? They should be benefiting from this too. This is a regional effort, and so hopefully we'll begin to see those changes actually running down to the Palestinian people as well, which would be great for, again, our long-term goal of security and regional prosperity. So,
So
yeah, it's
there's a
very.
question from the audience. I was going to ask you later on, but might as well ask you now since it's related. Just your own thoughts on the inclusion of Israel into CENTCOM. What does that mean, strategically speaking?
So I know you and Mick Mulroy, my predecessor, who's also at MEI, wrote an article about this as well. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. I think a lot of people, and even while it was being discussed in the building, and by the way, I feel really proud that I was there and kind of part of the effort to make this change. I don't think it could have happened prior to the Abraham Accords
Okay.
because of the publicly not aligned relationships between Israel and the other countries in the CENTCOM AOR. But but with the advent of the Abraham Accords, I think the argument is sort of moot at this point. I think it's been proven to be.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of, and I think you and Mick were spot on. There's been a lot of misunderstanding about, is CENTCOM going to get a whole bunch of new stuff now? No,
Right.
no. But you will see new things like the recent, escort, I think it was B-52. I could be wrong, but there'll be more joint operations like that between CENTCOM and Israel, and that's exciting. And I think it makes sense. It makes sense for the region. It makes sense for us, and certainly I think I would imagine that Israel would be pleased with that as well. Although publicly, I think they would say there's no change, and we have a great relationship, the end. So
What about the opportunities for not US, Arab-Israeli security cooperation? Do you feel like there's a ceiling there, as excited as we are about the inclusion of
so
Israel in the CENTCOM?
yeah, I mean, of all the pillars of the Abraham Accords, I think the security pillar is advancing the most slowly.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that it makes a lot of sense. But I do think that we're going to be seeing more and more cooperation, and
Takes time to build trust, right?
that's right. That's right. In some ways, they've gotten married, but in some ways, they're still dating. Maybe it's like a traditional engagement where you get engaged so you can start dating. I don't know, but I think it will take time. They have to get to know each other, but I'm very optimistic long term.
What are some of the obvious areas? I mean, I'm thinking maybe missile defense, right? I mean, the Israelis have a lot to offer in that, especially on shorter range rockets and missiles.
missile defense, integrated air defense, counter drone, as well. Drones are being increasingly featured in defense, and not only like traditional defense, but also homeland security as well. Because as you know, in that part of the world, there is a lot of overlap between kind of the domestic security force and the defense forces. Sometimes they're one and the same in many regards. So yeah, I think there's going to be a ton of opportunity, and a lot of I think a lot of the countries involved in the Abraham Accords are excited to learn best practices from the Israelis. So I think that will be good. I think it'll be helpful for all of us.
Do you think the Saudis will join the Abraham Accords? What's your view on that?
I do. I absolutely believe that they will, and
Okay.
and I'm looking forward to the day when that happens. I can't say it's going to happen tomorrow, but as you noted, they're likely to face a change in leadership, and we'll see what that brings. But I think ultimately, for them, it's different because of their role in the religious world, in the Sunni religious world as the leader. So they have other considerations that some other countries that have already normalized don't have, and so um, I think it will take time, and there are several things that need to be worked out still. But I'm confident we will see that, and I actually also think eventually Qatar will normalize as well. So
Do you think if MBS becomes king, this is the trigger?
um, it could be.
Okay. Um, Something else that you worked on when you were in the building was the F-35 deal to the Emirates. Um was the current administration wise to put a hold on that, or at least review a bunch of arms sales to our partners?
I mean, they're fully within their rights,
Yes,
obviously. I
they
mean,
are.
I I actually mentioned this in my Egypt article,
Hmm.
but it's you run similar risks when you, like, if for example they put a hold and they never lift it, or they put a multi-year hold on some of these things. Look, like for the Emiratis, the risk to the UAE from Iran has gone up since the Abraham Accords, and every single country that has normalized relations with Israel faces now an increased threat from Iran as a result. And UAE, in my view, and UAE and Bahrain are like top of the list there. So they do have new security requirements that prior to the Abraham Accords they didn't have, and part of what uh, part of what that factored into the ultimate decision to sell them F-35 due to that increased risk. So I think ultimately, I'm hopeful the Biden administration will do the right thing. They'll see all of these, the new reality, and they will make the right decision. My concern is if they they leave the hold, and make it more permanent, then the Emiratis still have this requirement, um, and they will buy something from someone else, and once again we risk
Won't be as good.
it definitely won't be as good.
It will mess
And
up interoperability too. So, you know,
exactly,
I'm
100%,
not as worried about that risk, but I
100%.
understand what you're saying. Look, I understand the security requirement piece of it, but when the Egyptians and the Jordanians signed peace deals with the Israelis, they were immediately rewarded with large arms sales from the United States. You're telling me that this was not part of the equation here?
Um, well, it happened after. And the other thing that I would say is we have, and you know this, we have internal to DoD a very strict process for evaluating the letters of request that come in for foreign military sales. And we, sorry
Is
about
that
that.
me or you?
No,
That's
that's totally me. You
sorry,
you actually know how to turn all of that stuff off on your computer, and I don't.
hardly.
I don't. Um, but yeah, I think for me ultimately, and the reason that a lot of us were comfortable with this is because it went through our entire legal process,
Mhm.
appropriately and correctly. So it wasn't just a couple of very senior people agreeing to, oh, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. No, you submit the letters of request, it goes through our formal legal process, and we'll evaluate it just like we evaluate every other letter of request that comes through. And that's exactly what happened.
I know, by the way, Congress had a say too.
They had a big say. They
Right.
had a big say. Absolutely.
Okay, moving on. Removing the terrorist designation of the Houthis. Good or bad?
Yes. Um,
And just
well,
tie it to the broader issue of Yemen, please, just so we don't look like we're the Howard Stern show.
so personal opinion, bad to remove the Houthis from the list.
Why is that?
Well, look, the argument was and has always been that that a designation will cause a humanitarian crisis, right? Because aid will not be able to reach the population in need. And as an old hand of excuse me, terrorism finance sanctions. And I mean, I remember back in the day, the Bush administration was, actually sanctioning humanitarian organizations themselves because they were fronts for terrorist organizations. Like, this has been a steady argument against sanctions from the beginning, and I'm not saying it's not valid, but I will point to the fact that the attack on Marib is worsening the humanitarian crisis. The attack on Marib has resulted in a humanitarian, a broadening humanitarian crisis, and that uh, is not something. I mean, how were sanctions, involved in that? At that point, to me, reducing sanctions or lifting the sanctions was like a reward that was not deserved. The Houthis are causing right now this attack on Marib, a humanitarian issue, additional adding on to the misery that the Yemeni people have experienced for years now. I also want to point out, more broadly, the Houthis rolled out a new missile the other day.
Yeah, I
Um,
saw that.
did you see? I mean, so this new missile actually has solid propellant.
Right.
So that, number one, reduces the response time for interdiction. And it also, I mean, how else would they get that if not from Iran? So, we can't talk about Yemen in a bubble. And people like to talk about Saudi. I think, with respect to Yemen or the Saudi-led coalition, and certainly there, again, there have been issues there. what we were trying to do in the Trump administration was to help them. Now we didn't do very much. Um, we wanted to. One of the things that we believed was that assisting them with more accurate targeting would reduce humanitarian casualties. Um, but we didn't. We didn't get far with any of that because um, most of the members in Congress that we dealt with were not supportive of those activities. They were not supportive of the funding we requested for those activities. And I leave it to you all to kind of judge if that was right or wrong. But I think if we're not, providing help towards a constructive end, um, then I just I question what we're doing. And I worked closely with Tim Linder King. I know he's working very hard on this issue, but I just I'm just not sure what is going to change. Why would anything change? The Houthis are going to keep pushing forward. The more they attack Saudi Arabia, the more the Saudis are going to respond, the more this conflict is not going to end. So I wish we could have done more, and I know a lot of people are probably glad we couldn't, but that's sort of my view.
I think what you're saying implicitly or explicitly is that regardless of whether we have kept the terrorist designation on the Houthis or removed it, really it would not have changed much facts on the ground and what was happening in the conflict. Because when we had it before, they still were also launching attacks against the Saudis. Okay, we removed the designation. You correctly pointed out that they have increased the tempo of their attacks, whether it's in Marib or elsewhere.
Yeah.
Now, why they're doing that, whether they want to enhance their bargaining hand because they expect that there's going to be talks soon, doesn't matter. But the point of the matter is that with or without the designation, didn't make a whole lot of difference on the actual conflict. Is that fair?
Where it made a difference, though, is it's important to call them terrorists because of their activities and because of their destabilizing activities, both inside of Yemen and in the region. So we believed that in that sense, it did make a difference. And that's why it was important to do it. But I wasn't sure it was ever going to happen. It had been discussed for so long internally in the interagency, and there were a lot of people who were opposed to it, and a lot of people, working inside the administration, political appointees were opposed to it, and it was a pretty vibrant discussion. And so I really I wasn't sure for a long time up until it happened what the decision ultimately would be.
Okay. I think we got 7 or so more minutes. Let's talk about the GCC feud, the Gulf Cooperation Council dispute, which seems to have subsided quite a bit recently with the improvement in relations between the Qataris and the Saudis, at least. So tell us, how much were you talking about this during your time in administration? How much were you engaging the Gulf partners on that issue specifically? I know that your colleagues in the White House with Jared Kushner had an active role in that. So how much were you involved in that? And also tell us where do things stand now and where they might be headed in the future? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but just give us your own prediction.
So I think a couple things. So first of all, yes, I'm pleased that at least between Saudi and Qatar, the situation is improving. I had every opportunity that I took to talk about it, I engaged. And because it's extremely deleterious. Like, we, the United States, need our Gulf partners to, and especially the quartet, to get along and work together. And primarily because we, well, for a lot of reasons, but also as a strong deterrent against Iran. Now, people talk about different countries having different levels of involvement, countering versus partnering, but the reality is that there was no chance of any resolution whatsoever, and we were concerned that the we wanted to keep kind of the Qataris inside of the Gulf family rather than seeing them out of some would argue out of necessity or other reasons sort of further drift. So that's not something that we supported, and that's something that we actively worked to end. I did what I could. I really, as you can see, believe very strongly in maintaining strong relations with our partners. So I engaged a lot and learned a lot about some of the reasons for the rift, but ultimately, those details to me, first of all, was inappropriate for Defense Department to engage in those sort of matters. But second of all, really, ultimately, what was important was for us to say, look, understand there's issues on all sides, but we really need you to come together. And we listed many reasons why. And so I'm pleased that we are where we are. I think it's delicate. I think it's very delicate. But I know there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to try to strengthen what's already been decided and hopefully not move backwards.
Okay, so it'll take more than a week, right?
Yes.
Here's a question from the audience, which I think is good. From Amir Hanif. Doesn't sanctioning the Houthis, but not the Saudis, for their actions in Yemen risk making the US seem like a biased player and hurt our ability to help the parties in the region reach a constructive solution? I know your answer, but I want to hear it.
I'm sorry. So I got distracted because Amr is a former colleague of mine. Hi, Amr.
There you go. Okay, so doesn't sanctioning the Houthis, but not the Saudis, for their actions in Yemen risk making us look like a biased player, and it hurts our ability to help the parties reach a constructive solution?
So thanks for the question and thanks for dialing in today. I think we have to take a step back and look at the legal definition of a terrorist organization. And this was an FTO designation, so this was a State Department designation. I don't think that in this case, I don't think there's any materiality or any reason why that threshold would be reached for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And conversely, the Houthis have repeatedly met that mark and met that ceiling. So I think there's some pretty clear legal reasons why that wouldn't happen. But also from a policy perspective, once again, I mean, if you're looking at this without an eye toward the importance of maintaining our partnerships and therefore our leverage to influence things in the direction that we want them to move in, designation is you're basically giving up on dialogue. That's what the designation says, and that was what we were messaging with the Houthi designation. I mean, we had left so much time for conversations, and the UN was working so hard, but nothing ever came from any of the discussions. Things just kept getting worse, and the attacks increased, and so yeah.
Not to dwell too much on the terrorist designation stuff, but the Turkish defense attaché in Turkish embassy in Washington is asking you, what is your terrorist organization definition?
Well, it's not my personal definition. It's the definition of
The
the
State
US
Department?
government. Yeah. So for the FTO designation, you can look it up online. There's a very clear language about um, what
But I think you understand why he's asking that question.
I do, and
And
I'm
it's actually pretty explicit. What about the PKK and the YPG? Because they're allies, do they still fit the definition? I'm
uh,
not endorsing any of this. I'm just asking the question as is, literally.
yeah. Um, so I understand the question. I understand the question. It's a complex subject.
Okay.
Thankfully, Turkey
Sadly,
is
I asked
not
you
in
that
my
question at the
portfolio.
very end when our time is up, but you could always get in touch with our Turkish friend and continue that conversation.
Maybe I'll write an article. Thank you for the question.
Okay. Simone, it is 10:30, so I want to be respectful of your time and the audience's time. But tell us, what is it that you are excited to work on with MEI? What are some of the issues, priorities, so that people know what's on your agenda?
Um, well, thanks for that. And again, thanks for the very warm welcome to the Middle East Institute. I'm really excited to be part of this group. Very impressive group. I'm still working out exactly what I want to work on. I think the next article I'm writing one on Yemen. I think I'm writing a follow up to my Egypt article as well, and I'm eager to work on some longer stuff with another colleague at MEI on terrorism finance and advances in terrorism finance, particularly in the Gulf. So that
Marwa Maziad?
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
Marwa asked you a
Marwa.
question, but hey, Marwa, if you're online, your question is like 17 sentences. So I'm sorry I didn't get to it, but you guys can talk later.
Marwa, send me your questions. I'll answer them.
Okay, I'll send it to you by email.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, that's it. I'm working with her on this, and I think I owe you something. So sorry, Marwa, it's late, but
Okay,
I'm very much looking forward to working on that together.
copy. Any final thoughts, Simone, before we say goodbye?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to
You're
talk
welcome.
to everybody today. Please feel free to reach out and continue the conversation individually, and look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Copy. It's great to have you on board, Simone, once again, and thank you for your time this morning. And we'll continue the conversation. So everybody, thanks for logging in. Sorry I didn't take all the questions. We'll try to do better next time.